that gives people issues is mid-coat sanding, meaning sanding between the coats. If you're using an oil finish, oil is a very thin finish. It doesn't build a lot, particularly if you've got a stain under it or a dye. You've got to have something to sand. And so if you're using an oil finish, to get 2 or 3 coats on there before you try to do a mid-coat sanding is a pretty good idea. In the case of a water base, solvent base, one of the things you got to know, no matter what, as soon as any liquid hits it, that grain is going to raise, it's going to fuzz, and you want to get it down. But again, the first coat of anything you don't have a lot of build there. In the case of water base, what I like to do is once I've got my color on, even if I've got the fuzzies, if I try to sand it, I'm going to start cutting color. I just don't have anything there to sand. So I'm going to put my first coat on. It doesn't matter. And in this case, it doesn't matter what I'm applying. If I'm using a water base, solvent base, it doesn't matter. I'm going to get the first coat on. Once that first coat is on, I'm going to scuff sand it. That's what we call it. Now, typically what I use is a 320 grit sanding sponge. This is one, it's called Rhino Soft, that's made by, we buy these from, you can look on the web, from Industrial Supply. And we use a 320 grit. On the first coat of finish, once it's dry, it's going to feel kind of rough. What you want to do is you simply want to take and just, on the first coat, you want to wipe it. Avoid any edge. Avoid a sharp edge. If you don't, you're going to cut through. You're going to cut through your color very quickly. If I'm using an oil finish, I'm going to get at least 2 coats on it. Then I'm going to go to a 600 because again, I don't have the material there that I can do a lot of sanding. And I'll use the 600 in exactly the same manner. You have to build your finish. You know, there's 2 ways of getting wood smooth. One is you work the wood, which you have to do. The other is you have to work the finish. Now I see guys out here who will sand their wood up to 1,000 grit, 600 grit, whatever. If you're using an oil finish, that's probably okay. Smoother you got it, the less sand scratch you have to fill. I just told you something. You got to fill them sand scratches. And we talked about the oil is a very thin finish. So a 600 grit paper leaves less of a scratch to have to fill than a 320. But typically sprayed finishes, lacquers, any of them, water base, they're going to give you a little bit more aggravated grain raising or fuzzing. It's more material. So you want to use something like a 320 because it's going to cut quick, meaning it's going to grate it. It's going to knock that fuzz down, those whiskers down very quickly. And you want that. The reason you want that, if you take a 600 and do it, you're going to have to do a lot of sanding. The more rubbing you're doing, the more likely you are to cut through an edge. I never sand an edge until after, and in this case, on this particular chest, we're getting ready to do the final coat. In this case, we've got our color, we've got a coat of shellac to pop the grain, and then we've got 2 good heavy coats, 2 good full wet coats of water-based finish on here. So we have a base to work from. Now, as I feel this is perfectly smooth. It feels just like glass. But a sprayed finish, because it's laying down more product than a wiped finish, What it's going to do is it's going to fill those 320 scratches with no issue whatsoever. Another issue you have is moldings. Many times moldings are run off the edge of a piece of wood. Typically that's a 1/4 sawn grain. Moldings in many cases will be more aggravated as far as grain raising, and in this case where you have tiger maple, you have a hard grain, soft grain, and it can get a little rough on you. Here's a tip. This is a sanding block that we have some PSA, pressure sensitive, 320 grit on. You notice on the back side of this, there's no sandpaper. We've trimmed the edge. And the reason for that is that we can sand right along that edge right there, or a little step in this molding, without cutting into the back. If I use this and I've got sandpaper on here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a line. I'm focusing on this surface, but I'm going to cut a line on this surface. So by using, this is just a piece of MDF. One of the things I like with the sanding sponges is that they are a little bit, they're flexible. I can fold them in any different direction that I want. And they cut nice and quick. In the case of the face of this molding, if you look out here, now this is a round profile. They make these, some of them call them tadpoles, some of them call them just, I think Woodcraft has them as sanding profiles. And these are made that you can wrap a piece of sandpaper around them. And they will help you sand your profiles. Now not only do they help in the mid coat, but they help in just sanding. But what you want to do, again, when you're sanding a mid coat, it's basically a wipe. And remember something, you're building to this point. You're not going to achieve that perfectly smooth surface with a sprayed material on the first coat. You've got to get something on here to be able to work. Otherwise, you're sanding through. Very easy to sand through them. Now,